Those who aren't well versed in K-dramas or any adaptation of Xiyouji, Journey to the West, probably haven't heard of a Korean Odyssey or Hwayugi. When I say it's an adaptation, it's more accurate to say in name only, or that it's a reimagining, as the premise is that of equivalents of the novel's main characters, living in late 2010s South Korea. Many charming yet consistent alternate takes on the characters can be seen here, such as Sun Wukong and Yoo Mo-wan's mixed relationship as sworn brothers and fierce opponents, being reworked as their respective equivalents Sun Oh-gon and Woo Ma-wan being awkward housemates, or the greedy and lustful Zhu Baiji's equivalent of Baekye being a K-pop star to be popular with the ladies. This sort of fun premise alone wouldn't be able to carry over 20 hours of television though. What makes this reimagining a surprising treat is how certain themes of the original text are either incorporated into or challenged within Hwayugi. An example would be the TV series' focus on letting go of certain goals or desires to better oneself, which ties into the heavily Buddhist ideas of Xiyouji, in letting go of vice or attachments for the main characters to attain Buddhahood. This can be seen in many of Hwayugi's characters being trapped by their desires and the situation bettering when they let go of them, such as Baekye having to let go of his attachment to Busha when realizing she has been completely separated from Asanyo. Wu having to change his goals of becoming the god to save his wife and instead performing enough penance for her actions. Or Jin Sonmi, the incarnation of Samjan, the series equivalent of Swanzan or Sanzan, having to let go of her feelings of love for Son Oh-gon and making a sacrifice capable of saving the world. Both also focus on the character flaws necessary to overcome and how obsession with such things causes the characters to avoid the best decision, such as how Wu's attempts to punish Oh-gon backfire on him, or how General Winter's desire to free his sister from their curse leads to treachery. The original text also took many satirical jabs at the bureaucracy of China that has given its equivalent in the spiritual realms indirect and unreasonable manner, showing the unchanging aspect of constant bureaucracy and the lack of faith in leadership it spreads. Due to the cultural differences of modern South Korea and 16th century China, in which Xiyouji was published, or 7th century China where it is set, Hwayugi is written around ideas of romance popular within K-dramas, and manifests this through being primarily a love story of Jin Sonmi and Son Oh-gon come to realize their true feelings for each other. Initially with the Jingu Chong headband's modernized equivalent in the bracelet Gumgango, causing physical and emotional pain to Oh-gon's heart when disobeying Samjan, rather than the intense headaches as well as making him fall in love with her. It's through their experience together though that this love becomes genuine and reciprocated. Romance is obviously not a major focus of the Buddhist messages of Xiyouji, but it works in Hwayugi in showing what love can accomplish, such as the changing of one's tormenting destiny, or saving the world when ideas of emptiness fail. I'm not trying to pass this off as a masterpiece of television though, as it certainly has flaws to it. The Busha storyline is definitely the weakest part of the show, with some elements of her showcasing the issues and writing amnesia stories, and the antagonistic force that drives the second half of the series only coming about because she made the same simple mistake twice in a row. There's also some plot lines that could have been trimmed down or removed without any loss, such as Wu's mini-arc of wanting to retire his human persona before changing his mind due to the joy he brings many, being resolved in half an episode and not adding to his character growth. It's also far from the best reimagining of Xiyouji, with the obvious competition for that spot, which utilised the Buddha-Taoist ideals of the novel to a great extent, but it is still overall a fairly good fusion of romance, action, and comedy with a supernatural flavour, driven by some engaging character motivations. The important aspect of Hwayugi is in what other reimaginings of classical works can accomplish, of which bad attempts at are as numerous as the many bad remakes of beloved films. Note that the comparisons will mainly be of classical works, as if this was a video centered around the original source of the past century, as many remakes are rooted in, this video would instead be a praise of the 80s versions of The Fly or The Thing, or even the 50s version of The Ten Commandments, which was a remake of Cecil B. DeMille's 1923 version. For instance, it's ironic how different in quality it is from an Australian soft reboot of Xiyouji, specifically its Japanese TV adaptation Xiyouji, known internationally as Monkey. In The New Legend of Monkey, which ends up being a spin-off and adaptation in name only, but with terrible quality such as the main characters all being turned into random Caucasians, despite several of them being meant to be the exact same as the novel and or show, rather than taking Hwayugi's approach of Xiyouji's pilgrimage having not happened within its universe's history or literature. This is especially an issue in the West, wherein alternate takes on classical works often either miss the point of the original or simply dilute the cultural consciousness of it. Works of Greek mythology have been poorly represented for decades in terms of authenticity to the sources, even in some of the films and series that are okay in their own right. But one that stands out as an especially egregious one is the 2014 Hercules film. The revisionist premise of taking a grounded look at the story of Heracles and the supposed truth is an okay premise, but it fails to execute it when everything outside of the Hercules legend is a lie premise is a very generic action flick with the only one of the legendary labours to have either of its myth or reality presented being the slaying of the Nemean lion. Immortals is even worse in this regard, as its paper-thin plot and such deviations from the cultural sources that can barely even be called a Greek mythology fanfiction provides absolutely nothing of worth beyond some okay visuals. The poor treatment of such Western mythology within film for the majority is not just for the Hellenistic, but most inaccurate takes on Norse myths and Arthurian legend too highlights another problem that's quite the cultural issue in mainstream entertainment, having diluted the average acumen of cultures and stories that were foundational building blocks of Western culture, to the point that if one were asked to tell the story of Hercules, there's a good chance they may summarise the Disney film rather than his 12 labours. Hwayugi doesn't have this issue, as the Xiyouji story is popular enough of a tale throughout most of Asia that the target audience would understand the references and cultural ties behind them, without great extrapolation. I think this serves as a wake-up call to the West, to stay knowledgeable of your cultural works for future generations to not lose sight of the original versions, and to not let deconstructive forces destroy your heritage. Modernising the classic work also comes with its additional hurdle of adapting the ideas to fit the setting. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet is an obvious example of failing at this, as set in the film in 1990s Italy, yet having dialogue still be spoken in early modern English is completely immersion breaking, when not fitting the time period nor the audience. When anyone with more than surface level knowledge of Shakespeare should be aware that the language used was that of his era rather than intentionally classical. He put care into differentiating between the speech patterns of commoners and nobility within his plays, and his introduction of unique phrases and portmanteaus to the English language makes it quite inauthentic to his style that the film's dialogue is a carbon copy of the original version and lacks any sort of local slang or phrases. It's not as though Western works fail in this constantly, at least, with films such as West Side Story or China Girl perfectly understanding the core elements necessary to change when adapting the same play into a more modern setting, foreign from the original. Hwayugi perfectly understands the necessary change not only in character names and dynamics, but in the mannerisms of their dialogue not being stuck in the past. This works despite the immense age of their characters, as many of them have spent long enough within modern times to adapt. Overall, A Korean Odyssey has managed to prove that reimagining a classical cultural treasure is far from an impossible task in the modern era. Hopefully, you'll have learned something if aspiring for similar premises, or at least have taken enough interest in giving the series a chance, be you familiar with the world of K-dramas, or dipping your toes into the ocean of them.